Alright, welcome to another edition of What the Fuck Happenings here in Mendham. Not lately. But whatever. Alright, so I've made this video twice, and twice there has been some failure. So first I would blame this stupid whatever new comment thing of YouTube's, this studio beta bullshit. But anyway, this browser failed, and then everything else started failing, and the whole thing got ruined, and the video failed. So that was the first one, after, 40 minutes or whatever. Then the second one ended up being a 2-hour video. Okay, just redoing the comments, doing everything, and so I went on too long. And so the video file got too big, and it used up the free space in the hard drive, and apparently it didn't save the file because of that correctly. And so, yeah, I had 8 gigabytes of nothing. So I'm back again. So I don't even know if it's hard to have any energy to do this again. So, but we'll do it again, some of it. So this comment, I don't know if you still watch Flora, but she has gone completely insane. So yeah, this is a problem with people in the past, and I've always been a little bit distant from Flora just because her grounding didn't seem correct to me. So she's saying some of the right things, but I would think she was saying them for the wrong reasons. And I don't think she's ever been able to understand evolution. And so, if you don't understand evolution, you can't really understand how we're not the product of magic. So she always seemed kind of suspect to me. But anyway, so the fact that apparently she went back to religion and all that jazz, talking about seeing angels, etc. Yeah, well, whatever. I can't account for those kinds of brain, whatever, fart catastrophes. I mean, the fake Sagan comes to mind just because it's like, well, how the hell do you undo being rational? I mean, how do you go from being rational to being irrational? That kind of thing. It just doesn't make any sense. Hard to understand. This asshole just making excuses for Jordan Peterson, and of course it all comes down to another religious kind of reason. And we all should wear iron shirts and pray to the ironing god and all of that kind of crap, and we all should be conventional, and fuck that bullshit for no good reason, except God says so. So anyway, then this Lukois posted a link to the video, and I clicked on it, and that's how I ended up going 2 hours. But anyway, so we'll do that again. Just because it's a conversation about the nature of things, sort of, between some recent vegan person and some longer vegan person talking about what it is. And I don't think this title really describes it very well, the intricacies of veganism, because there's too personal. That's why I don't like the word veganism or vegan, because it doesn't mean anything, because people are that for a lot of different reasons. Some because it's healthier, and some because it's ethical, but it's only ethical in some kind of still human-centric kind of way, and blah 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 blah. So, yeah, why be a Christian? Does that say? Oh, ew. Ew. Well, I don't recognize either one of these people, so we'll just play along, I guess. Again, sort of.
I don't perceive that to be one, because the natural order exists, and
I have sped it up a little bit this time. The last time I played it,
You haven't seen the sun in like forever, so you search for a beach vacation. Sunny beaches, sandy beaches, big beaches.
I think we all acknowledge that nature's a violent thing.
Yes, and capitalism is a violent thing, and it's harshly wasteful of human resource, and this whole idea that you're paying people to advertise is bad enough, but when you think about what that involves, like you had to pay a bunch of people to create the production of the commercial. This is all wasted energy. Just wasted the human initiative. Wasted. Paying salaries to people to do things that just have no real value. It's not a good idea. Vegans should know that.
one thing I don't like about vegans sometimes is when we romanticize animals to this extent where we think that they're virtuous beings, and where humans commit the problem.
Well, they are virtuous in the sense that they don't know better. So you could argue that what's the least virtuous thing a human being does is when they know something's wrong and they do it anyway. They know they're going to hurt somebody, they don't care. I mean, animals don't do that. They don't know they're hurting things. They don't really have the volition that we have in terms of having knowledge of implications. They don't know their food comes from a slaughterhouse, so to speak. They don't know their food is a being equally trying to struggle and eke out an existence, and that it hurts them to be killed. They don't know that. They don't even know what being killed is. They have no idea about even their own mortality. No concept. So in a sense, they are virtuous.
But nature is violent and brutal and horrible.
Yes, nature is. The game we're playing is violent and brutal and horrible. The stupid competition game, where the whole theme, the main underwriting mechanism, is the destruction of the inferior, the destruction of most organisms before they can replicate, so that the winners win and the losers lose. And the idea is it takes a lot more losers to make a winner. And that's the game being played. It takes 100 losers for one winner kind of idea, ratio. And that you can't have a winning game without creating this horrible losing game.
Horrible, and animals don't die in nice ways at all. But that doesn't mean that we are therefore entitled to harm them, because we could use that justification to hurt any animal. I mean, all animals, I mean, even humans in many areas around the world are going to die in horrific ways. But we won't be justified to then kill them in any less horrific way to try and...
Yeah, well, I mean, so...
Yes, less horrific is a good idea. So, yes, if you always have, if that's all your choice is they'll die bad or I can make them die good, then that's what you do. And then the only difference in terms of making some sort of more complex question is, well, they're the one way. If I kill them, they'll live a week less, or 2 weeks less, or a month less, or 2 years less, something like that. So you're killing them sooner, and that they're going to miss out on some big fun in between time. And that's the argument: is whether they're really going to miss out on any big fun.
So I'm not kind of making a case that we therefore have a right to kind of inflict suffering on them. I'm saying that you can imagine the virtuous hunter who genuinely is like I want to save these animals, man. I don't want them to have to live the rest of their days in this horrific, violent, brutal situation. I'd rather them just die painlessly now.
So do we condone just eliminating?
Right, but there's no such thing as that virtuous hunter. What she's saying is basically the Kevorkian. I'll go out and peacefully put them out of their misery because I enjoy it. But that's the catch, right? So if they're personally gaining from doing it, then they wouldn't be a virtuous hunter. They'd still be hunting merely because they're self-interest, they enjoy doing it. So the truly virtuous hunter would be one who is, has to drag themselves out of bed to go to the hunting chore and do the unpleasant work of ruining something's day to protect it from worse days. And it's all unpleasant. It's like being a doctor in some respects, right? You have to spend your day sort of imposing some amount of pain and discomfort to cure people of their ailments and problems, and that, it's a very uncomfortable position to be in. I would imagine. I would find it very uncomfortable to have to cause pain to prevent pain. That's no fun.
In the animal kingdom, because that would be the natural conclusion of that. If we recognise that these animals are going to die and we recognise that nature's violent, then to be virtuous becomes, well, then to wipe out all, which potentially is the most virtuous.
Yeah, would you say someone who bites the bullet?
Yes, it is potentially the right answer, and it's for some of us the potential is far outweighs any other consideration altogether. So the potential is pretty high that that's the right answer, and there's low probability of there being any underlying fact that we're missing regarding human function, purpose, service, utility, value. That it is in fact true that just as we do not weep for the absence of Martians and the absence of Venetians and the absence of Plutonians, and I could go through all the planets, And clearly we don't even really consider the absent, Alpha Centaurians and all the other bullshit that you can just keep doing that forever. That there isn't some stark, horrible horror we recognize. We sit there and have all these beautiful pictures of the universe, and they don't have any obvious signs of life in them. It's just pretty colors, and no one's weeping over all the harsh tragedy of all these barren worlds. And the same would be true for our planet being absent. The chaos and the mush and the industry of this senseless competition where a bunch of Xerox machines are trying to out-Xerox each other, and doing so by harming and killing a bunch of little baby Xerox machines.
And says that, minimization of suffering, it's like the anti-natalist position, which you might have come across. It's like some people think that if in humanity there is a net suffering, which there seems to be, if you consider the worldwide population of humanity, it seems that there's probably a net suffering overall.
So again, this whole idea of defining net in a circumstance where there's only really one value, which is the negative, and all of the goods, most all the goods, are the absence of the negative. I feel good if I'm not poor, the negative. I feel good if I don't have cancer. I feel good if I don't have some problem. So, it's not like there's some good that can come from something that isn't a negative first, that you kind of need the negative to exist, and you have to fix it to have the good. So protecting something from bad, or preventing bad, is the good, and there is no good otherwise. There's no conceivable necessity for anything else. No other interest has to be protected. There just isn't any.
I'd like to minimize suffering, if we're going to be consistent, is just to cull all living. The best thing we can possibly do is keep contributing to global warming, so that the whole population just dies out, right?
Sounds like we're right.
But we know that that's not what global warming will lead to. So again, that's global warming. It just means you go back to Jurassic Park. You go back to a world that has more energy in it, and therefore more potential to create animated organisms. So a warmer planet won't be barren. And it might have less humans in it, because humans are all living in circumstances that won't be able to endure the change in the environment, in the sense that their houses will all be flooded and all that kind of crap. But it won't create any global catastrophe in terms of the biological organisms will enjoy the warmer temperatures. There's not a whole lot of biological organisms living in Antarctica. It just isn't. It doesn't thrive in cold places. It thrives in warm places. Thermodynamics and such.
In the Avengers Endgame script now, doesn't it?
Yeah, but you know what I mean? Maybe if veganism is a philosophy about the minimization of unnecessary suffering, maybe the best thing a vegan can do is be the least environmentally friendly person on the planet.
Yeah, so if environmentally unfriendliness meant that you weren't just tormenting things rather than killing them, so it's a slow death. It's like saying, it's like, well, I've brought up these examples before, but I mean, you don't solve the feral cat problem, the overpopulation of cats, through this mechanism that doesn't work, which is capturing a tiny percentage of the cats and neutering them and then throwing them back on the street to eat garbage. It doesn't work. It's too slow. It won't solve the problem. It won't lead to the extermination you need. It just torments the cats, in my opinion. You're just forcing them to have surgeries, and you're imposing all that crap on them in this pretense that they need to live, when of course they don't need to live. They need to be comfortable while they're alive, but they don't need to live 10 years or 15 years or 25 years. If you only got 10 years of life, you think yourself horribly shortchanged, and yet you think that's a nice full life for the cat. Why do you think that way? So, yeah, forget it. Why are you doing it the wrong way? So they waste, whatever, $700–800 on each cat, when they should spend the money capturing the cats and peacefully, gracefully exiting them from this dilemma.
I mean, this is something. It's a funny thing, isn't it? We stray into dangerous territory, obviously, for arguments of like people that believe that veganism is this kind of agenda to do that. But It's a very interesting proposition. I believe that life is mostly suffering, and I honestly don't believe that the happiness even...
Well, it's a kind of a mushy statement. So again, we're back to this whole Buddhist bullshit, and you know, I don't think that's... First, I don't think it's rhetoric that's been effective in the past. So, and I don't think it will be effective in the future to just say something stupid like life is suffering, because that's not what life is. Life is adventure and triumph, and it's lots of things. The question is whether all of those things are anything other than cleaning up a mess made by your own physiology. That is, you're an addict, and that's why the affection and attachment to heroin exist. And if you weren't an addict, you'd have no need for them. Just like if you're not addicted to cigarettes, you don't need to smoke. It's that fundamentally obvious that we're made out of our addictions, and these addictions are systemic. We need to breathe, and we need to feel comfortable, and we need to have food to feel comfortable, and we need to do all these things, certain things, to feel comfortable. And if we don't do these certain things, we won't feel comfortable. And that's kind of the obvious mechanism. And there's nothing intrinsically valuable in creating deficits that keep needing to be filled. So it's just a machine that makes holes, and then you fill the holes. Well, there's no need for the hole-making machine. But to say life is nothing but holes would be stupid. Clearly, we leave behind more unsatisfied ambition than accomplishment, and that's the nature of our existence. So you could say on net we don't fill all the holes. Well, that's true, but for many people the holes aren't that dramatic, and especially at different times in their life when they're going to opine on what their life is, they might be doing it from a position where they're quite comfortable, but their condition won't be sustained, and they will have to go through the transition from being alive to being dead. So they shouldn't be telling other people it's worth it when they haven't done it. That's clear. There's good reason to be quite apprehensive about having anything to be imposing any of this. It's such a sloppy bit of mess. So if I was the one that was going to be responsible for the next baby being born, and I push the button that says it gets born, would you feel okay about that in this world? And if I told you, well, it's going to be born in the third world, and it's going to be born here, and it's going to be born, and it's going to be its life potential. Well, you should be a little apprehensive about pressing that button. A lot apprehensive. I don't want to press the button for anybody, because I don't think anybody's winning. You know, who's the winner here? Point me to some winners. They all end up losers in the end. The sad, tragic fall happens. You see it. It's tragic and horrible. The rose wilts, fades, dies, the petals fall off. It sucks.
And comes close to counteracting the suffering, even just on a personal level.
Right.
Those hardships are much worse than any sense of joy that we ever feel.
So the hardships are much worse than the joy we feel. Yeah, sure. But it doesn't really matter, because that horny, hungry thing always keeps arising. So you're always hungry for your next adventure. You're hungry for your next conquest, the next release of your tension. Your tension's building up. You know the string to pull to release it. And you're used to that routine. And that's all you are. You're used to that routine. You have some control. And so you're comfortable with that mechanism because you've acclimated to it. And any change is change, and change sucks. So you don't want to change to not having a string to pull, even though you'll be free of needing to pull it. So people have a natural apprehension to going somewhere that's where there's less control, and certainly they have an apprehension conceding they're going to have to settle for not accomplishing all they want to accomplish. They're not going to overtly sign a contract that says, yes, I will not accomplish what I hope to accomplish, because they're ambitious.
So yes, I think there is the case to be made that if we want to eliminate suffering, well, that would be an elimination of life.
It's not just like that. That seems to be like a plausible situation. It's like if your philosophy really is as simple as minimize unnecessary suffering.
Right, that is, and the simplest way to minimize is to prevent. So if you want to minimize suffering, the easiest way to do it, the cost-effective way to do it, is to prevent it. And so you prevent it how? Well, you prevent it by stopping the reproduction process. So that's why it's called antinatalism. And more importantly, this applies to all animal organisms. They're better off not existing than existing, because existing has all kinds of jeopardy and risk. and clearly you don't have a good game. Okay, if this was just some fun park and it was all free and there was no price paid, that is, there was no negative to be endured, then you'd just say, sure, it's free, who cares? It's not a free lunch, though. It's an expensive lunch, and certain people pay more than other people pay, and the price is very, very high. So then you get into this whole argument of consent and the obligation to have a fair game of deciding who gets what.
Then it seems that you're kind of ethically obliged to commit mass suicide.
Yeah, I mean, I guess utilitarian.
So again, another concept where you don't have to kill yourself to prevent the future. So certainly you don't have to do any of that. The idea is not to reinitiate the game. So if this is the last hand that's dealt, then and the game you've decided is evil, so you've prevented it. Play your last hand, and that's it. So this doesn't have anything to do with suicide, but frankly, it wouldn't be a bad idea. For us all to concede, it's time to give up. But we're all not going to concede, so that's not going to be realistic. So it is going to have to be a more elaborate mechanism that leads us to a satisfactory conclusion. And that'll have to happen through these conversations and through convincing people that their personal ambitions don't have to die, that they can still live their life. They're just not going to continue to stick, continue to put coinage in this machine that creates way too many losers and way too few winners. And realistically, the definition of that winner and loser can't be a definition defined by people's own opinions of themselves. I mean, obviously people have way too high an opinion. They're all very beautiful and all very attractive, and they look fantastic, and they're very sexy, and they're very this. And by any rational standard, that is, if you actually took a sampling of 100 people, obviously 100 people would say, no, you're not any of those things.
Approach would reach that conclusion as well.
So why not? Like, what's the reproach to that?
Well, true. And if happiness is the possibility of happiness doesn't justify not killing them, well, what justification do we have left not to do that? Well, that's very interesting.
It's like you've got a burden in front of you.
Yes, right. So the bottom line is to understand that the happiness is only derived through the negative. So you have to be hungry before your food is satisfying. You have to be thirsty. So you have to walk the desert. You have to do something to create the tension for the relief to mean anything. That most of the goods are a relief or immunity from bad. So not having cancer feels good. Not being poor feels good. Not being, that's the way it works. Elimination of negatives is what makes us happy or comfortable. Not any true good that happens. And we've just got accustomed to that process. So we accept the negatives, the building up of the tension, because it comes in little doses. And the relief comes in rather big doses. I won the lottery, really. It's all at once, this big relief. And then a week later, you're back to feeling poor and burdened, and everything was fixed, and now everything's kind of broken again. And then we're built to do that, and we go through those routines. And if you're smart, then you'll figure out it is a routine, that it's just a reoccurring passion, and you just deal with it and try to get the most you can out of the mechanism of your deprivation and your relief. Try to soak it for as much comfort as you can, but that's all you're doing. You're just soaking a physiological device that is intended to keep you playing a game that no rational person would impose on a being.
It's that button, and it wipes out the human race and all living beings. You're probably not going to press that button, right?
Someone asked me that years ago, and I said no, and they said they would. And I said, how could you do that? And they said, because life is suffering. And I said, yeah, but we can change. Like, life could become so great, and maybe that's it. Maybe.
So again, it's this high thing. The whole point of saying life is suffering is supposed to be a recognition that it's systemically broken, that it's part of the function. You have to make a mess before you can gain a star for cleaning up a mess. There has to be a mess made. And the only thing that can make a mess is the existence of a feeling creature. It's the only thing that can be consequential, is that vulnerability or that jeopardy. So you have to create the risk before you can roll the dice into the risk. It can't mean anything to roll the dice if there's no skull and crossbones on them.
Life has the potential to change, but nature can't. You know, maybe as a society we could reach a point where we live in some form of idealistic utopia where these isms, these negative isms we discuss as something in the past, very, very unlikely that would ever happen.
Well, just getting over your own biology, it's not going to happen. It's your own biological function. You're like, again, you're not going to really have appreciation for even things like love without being lonely. You have to have certain, you have to build that up. You have to build up the negative. You have to fill the dam before you can, you know, release the water. You know, whatever metaphor you want to come up with. They all end up a little sexual, but that's really the game.
But maybe that is kind of like an idealistic, almost naive perspective of saying, well, things can change, so we should grant it the chance to change. Well, I don't know, society's progressed so far, but maybe we could continue to progress to a point where a lot of the things that we perceive to be wrong and cruel are no longer a thing of society, and maybe that's the point, that it's not about how we live now, it's about trying to foster a sense of a world where the things that we suffer from now are no longer things people have to...
It's getting beyond your own personal attachment to your existence and just recognizing that if you were looking at it as a true third party, disinterested third party, had no personal thing to gain from it, would you invest in it? And I can come up with scenarios that just point out that our investment is clearly based on racism and nepotism and all kinds of things, because if it isn't going to happen to our kids, we won't invest in it. If it's not going to happen to our race, we're not going to invest in it. I mean, those would be clear facts. You know, if there was some project to go populate the galaxy and we filled the spaceship full of foreigners, you know, darkies, how many white people would invest in it? You know, because it doesn't have them in it. So it can't be, it's not about life and it's not about humanity if it doesn't have white people in it. I mean, what, you're going to populate the planet with those people? That would be their attitude. A big giant piece of them, okay? It's not going to be like just 10%. It's going to be a big giant piece of them who aren't going to pay 10 cents for that. Because they don't care about it in any kind of principled way. They care about it in a very personal way. I'm important, my life's important, my adventures are important, my fantasies are important. They need to live, but they're not too sure about the rest of them.
Suffer from.
Yeah, it seems a bit
wishy-washy.
Well, I'm thinking about the fact that we are expending so much effort to try to save and prolong the sentient experience of this.
No, we're trying to prolong our own habits, okay, our routine, and that's all. And you know, there's absolutely no evidence that humans even give a shit about the future at all, because obviously we've borrowed their money. You know, we've mortgaged their house. The future's house has been mortgaged, insanely mortgaged. So let's just, you know, the whole global warming thing, the whole everything else has to do with now, me. Clearly there's no principled understanding that there's any value to this living thing. Again, that nobody's weeping for the absent Martians. They don't miss them. They don't think about it every day. They're not blighted by this horror. Oh, gee, all the beautiful music we're missing out on. All the beautiful this, the seven tentacle, you know, Wonka bee dance that we're not knowing how to do. You know, they're not doing any of that shit.
This creature of humanity, but also like the other animals of the animal kingdom, that perhaps is completely wasted, and we shouldn't be doing it at all, because the minimization of suffering would be a lot easier if we just kind of let it.
Yeah, it's prevent it. Okay, you can't let it just die out, because it doesn't just die out. So that's just more nonsense. It just doesn't fall off. This is a mess that exists previous to us getting into this mess, previous to us to arriving at the mess. And everybody keeps talking about the mess, and no one ever fixes it. And a lot of that's based on a lot of the bad construction of our whole democracy and everything else. I mean, I'm you know, my parents were pretty comfortable with the whole idea of euthanasia and dying right and all that kind of stuff, but they could make no preparation for their own demises, and they got lucky in the sense it wasn't too bad, but there was nothing they could fix, in the sense that, you know, well, I still got to vote for my Republican pals, even though they're religious kooks. So the compromises still broke every bit of any kind of function. So people who don't believe in it are voting for it because they don't have a choice. Because to have this, they have to have that mixed into it. So it's all these compromises and mushy solutions. And again, for the feral cats, I would argue it's a mushy, stupid compromise. Oh, we got to keep the cats alive. Oh, we got to do the right thing for the cats. Blah 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 blah. I love the cats. Blah blah blah. Yeah, well, if you really loved them, you wouldn't sit there and perpetuate their suffering, and think that you've solved the problem because you cut their nuts off. That didn't solve any problem, and it doesn't work. It's a fact, it doesn't work. It's completely ineffectual at eliminating or exterminating feral catism. And so you have to do something more unpleasant. And that's the truth. You're not going to cure this with love and a placebo. You're going to need a real cure.
Kind of fizzle out. It seems to be a kind of, it's not just like an interesting philosophical like musing. It's kind of it gets to the core of the whole philosophy that we're talking about. It knocks the legs out of it. The whole reason we're building this edifice of good treatment of animals and environmental consciousness and all this kind of stuff is based upon the minimization of suffering.
But it's not. It's based on a very human-centric view of all of that, and some sort of idea that good is nature, and that's bullshit. So again, a lot of vegans are not vegan for exactly the right reason. They only think the only torment that happens to animals is in some human factory farm, when we know that in the wild they do even worse. All of 90% of their calves die. 90% of the attrition numbers are obscene.
And if the minimization of suffering is the very thing that kind of takes the legs out, then we're in big trouble, surely.
I guess the question becomes, could we reach a point where we've minimized suffering so much that suffering is no longer prevalent?
What do you think? Do you think that's possible? I mean, as someone who quite confidently says that life is...
Well, I mean, the very fact that we can't even balance our budgets, balance our checkbooks, clearly we have no capacity to ever build in enough efficiencies to create a maximized potential. That is a life of a beautiful symmetry between functionality and pleasure. Because guess what? Fixing things and making things work and doing things is work, and work is unpleasant often. Often work requires you to risk your life and to risk your health and to risk your welfare to be productive. You can't even fix that, let alone fix this human condition of the fact that we're just addicts, and that most of our addictions do tax. We pay a price for our ambition in terms of other things get compromised.
It's constituted mainly in suffering. Do you think it's possible for that to be reversed? I mean, like there's a good philosophical literature. People should read Arthur Schopenhauer's essay on the sufferings of the world, where he was one of the kind of early people to wake up and make this point. It was like,
yeah, it made the point in the context of Buddhism again, though, which is just absolutely useless to make the point in the same way of obviously the huge failure of Buddhists to recognize anything, to get any of these value questions right, and they end up at the end of the philosophy is some sort of idiotic notion that somehow you can gain liberation from the meat grinder by jumping into a fire, and therefore you won't have to come back and be ground up again. When it doesn't make any sense, because the distinction between me and you and him is nothing. There's no rational distinction. The distinction is clearly just changing the 3 blind mice into 3 blind rats, or some other stupid minor change. The differences are irrelevant. It's the same jeopardy. Me with a broken leg, you with a broken leg. It's just not enough of a difference to matter.
If suffering is not the aim of humanity, then nature has completely failed in its mission. Like this is, it seems clear that suffering is the active thing, and
what seems clear is that most goods are made out of the absence or prevention or extermination or elimination of some negative thing. So you take away the negatives, it's all gravy, but it's not. But the whole point is that's the nature of the addiction. Heroin means nothing until you're addicted to it. Then it means something. I mean, cigarettes are nasty if you're not addicted to them.
Pleasure is the response to it, not the other way around, as people often think. Like all pleasures seem to be a kind of a negation of some kind of suffering. Like pleasure of eating is a negation of hunger and this kind of thing. They couldn't exist without virtue of the opposite. So
it's not the virtue of the opposite, it's the virtue of the actual thing that does exist, which is the deprivation, and you're just eliminating the deprivation. So again, if you're going to bother saying it's good to eliminate deprivation, it's also good to prevent deprivation. So just prevent it in the first place, and then you don't have to worry about it. Like I said, there's no negative balance. There's no deficit. The Martians aren't running a deficit. There's no deficit. They don't have a balance sheet that has too much cancer on it, too much exploitation, too many unfairnesses. All of that shit doesn't exist.
So, like you say, like it might not just be like a societal indictment that right now there's more suffering than there is. It might just be within human nature. It is the case that suffering is the predominant and always will be the predominant force. If that's the,
It's just the wrong word to use because it just doesn't say anything. Suffering doesn't say anything. It's some word that's used to describe all kinds of different kinds of manifestations of disquiet in one's brain. And there's a big difference between feeling a little mopey and you know, having a nail in your eye.
case, then what are we doing here?
Advertising.
Now let's take a look.
Support your advertisers.
I don't know. These are the sort of conversations I have very much privately, and it's like because it reveals something that you don't want to accept, really, doesn't it? It's kind of like we do. Or I do what I do because I have this idea that I.
No, you do what you do because you're a robot, and you're just regurgitating, reflecting all the little crap that's stuck to you in your life. So a bunch of little crap has stuck to you, little pieces of this and little pieces of that, and when you mix those little pieces together, you'll get some sort of new piece. But it's made out of the memes and the ideas and little things, concepts. So you pick up certain things, 2 + 2 = 4, and you say, okay, well, that's kind of solid. And then this, you know, well, the number 8 is made out of 2 4s, so that must be, you know, 4 × 2. And, you know, you can do all this kind of stuff and start adding all this stuff together based on the pieces that stick to you. You know, accusations of your hypocrisy or accusations of this or thoughts about that. And, your interactions with other people, and you start to realize, oh, I'm a selfish cunt, and I was just thinking about what I get out of it and what's in it for me, and I was doing this. Now you have some sense of remorse, or you have some sense of guilt, and you say, oh shit, and then you have humiliating moments where, you know, your ambition and your lack of care, you know, led to some catastrophe of waste or some stupid thing that happened, and you got, and so that builds your little bit of thing called your character, your philosophy, and your perspective, and whether you're a cautious person or whether you're reckless or whether you're risk averse, and whether you're a rationalizer and whether you're defensive, and whether you're all these things, and all that's just dictated by this stupid venture you've been on to acquire bits of experience. And some of those experiences enlighten you and give you eureka moments where you recognize one of these fundamental principles that are basically buried in our philosophical public life that are not talked about. Instead, people waste time talking about spirits and love and ghosts and fables and rubbish, you know, rather than getting to the core of the thing, which is we're not even doing anything original. We're just mechanically doing what things do as they slowly learn.
Can try and help in some way that would reduce this suffering, that would help in the long run, would prevent others, you know, human, non-human, from having to endure what people in, you know, human, non-human currently endure.
Right, so you recognize the obvious. I hate being in pain and discomfortable. It's horrible, it's awful. I hate the experience of illness and sickness and this and this and this. And I like not having all those problems and having successful days where I do what I wanted to do and I accomplish it successfully and everything works out fine and nobody gets hurt and the tires don't fall off or it doesn't blow up or I don't fail in some way. I like not failing. And then you figure out that, oh yeah, I'm not the only one doing the same thing. All these rest of these machines are trying to do the same thing. And they're having the same cost to benefit analysis they have to do, and they're going to, you know, and then you just add it up and you just say, you know, there's no me winning, there's, you know, winning. It doesn't matter whether it happens to me or it happens to him. What's the difference? You figure out those obvious things like, oh yeah, a broken leg, what does it mean? It means discomfort and blah 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 and all the crap that goes with it, and it's just like, well, what's the difference? It happens to me, it happens to him. Well, it can't make any difference logically. It can only make a difference to me personally. It can't make a difference logically.
But if it is this sort of like redundant kind of like pursuit for some sort of like inner peace, because I you know, maybe the reasons we do a lot of things we do to be virtuous is to reduce suffering within ourselves, to try and pretend that we're making a difference. You know, it's almost like a form of like self-congratulation where it's like, oh well,
Right. So that just gets into the mechanism of our psychology and the fact that we are not mechanisms that just draw a conclusion and are able to act on the conclusion. We have to act on it in the sense that it has to be, we have to see the social interest as our interest. So somehow we have to make it personal. So it has to be a victory for us somehow when team logic wins. So when the right answer wins, it has to be, yeah, good. Even though the right answer means we have the broken leg. And that's tricky. So altruism is always going to be tied to some sense of honor or decency or greatness or beauty. You want to be beautiful. The only way you can be beautiful is not to do something ugly, so you have to do the right thing and blah, 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 blah. And it ends up just being an ego question. But there's no way you can motivate the organism, because that's what we're really made to do, is to seek out things that smell good and go where it smells good. Well, philosophically, philosophical concepts don't smell. So we have to make them smell good. We have to make them into a hamburger. So it's like a cartoon where the little boat's out in the ocean and two cartoon characters start looking at each other, and one guy sees a hot dog and the other guy sees a hamburger. You know, you have to make the right thing to do into something that's a hamburger to you. That's a potato chip for me personally. It would be a potato chip. So yeah, you have to make the doing the right thing. You have to turn it into personal potato chips so you can eat them. Do them.
I know I'm suffering because life is suffering, so if I can help, that makes me feel good. So it's almost like a lot of what we do that's virtuous is in effect just a form of trying to reduce our own suffering by making ourselves feel like we're actually generating a positive difference.
I don't think that's really what it's doing. I think it's more like what I'm saying, which is, you know, the philosophical concept is correct. You've already humiliated yourself by recognizing I'm a selfish cunt, generally speaking. And I know these philosophical ideas have higher integrity than my rationalizations for what I want. And I know that I have to try to make those philosophical ideas into something I can rationally get attached to, in the sense that I have to humiliate myself, obviously. I have to degrade myself. I have to uglify myself to make those things, to make me understand that if I do this wrong thing, I am ugly. My Darian Gray picture will get ugly in the closet. And it'll have, the truth will be ugly. Not this facade I'm wearing, not this image I have, but the truth, the facts, will be this ugly painting. The painting will be me, and I'll be the painting, kind of thing. You just have to recognize that that's how your psychology, you're playing a game with your psychology. And once you know it's a game, then you know that, okay, that I know that these right answers always have to win, whether I like it or not. And you just make it a mental rule. And then it does almost, you almost need a personal incentive. It's like the guy who jumps on the grenade. I mean, he really has resolved that the truth matters, and I'm just going to do the right thing. Fuck it. I'm not even going to think about it. I'm just going to do it. And it'll be unpleasant and stupid, but I'm going to do it because it's the right thing. So fuck it. It just doesn't matter whether what's in it for me anymore, because I already know it's not about what's in it for me.
Yeah. And that's a pretty defeatist attitude as well, and it almost eradicates this idea that people do genuinely good things for genuinely good reasons.
Yeah, but I think most people will intuitively accept, if they think about it hard enough, that there's no truly altruistic act. You're always going to benefit.
So I would argue that I just don't know if I'm really willing to say that. The act itself is altruistic. The process of you making yourself personally comfortable with that truth, okay, personally comfortable with the idea of doing the right thing, even though it's unpleasant. Like, for example, you have to pull a nail out of your hand. It's in your hand and it hurts. And you know, logically, that the nail has to come out of your hand. But you know it hurts to pull it out. So you're stuck with this dilemma. But you know what the truth is. And really, you just work your way up to being able to pull the nail out of your hand. And just as you work your way up to jumping into a swimming pool, sometimes the water's a little cold. You have to work your way up to it. But it's not any real deception that you're doing. You're just getting past your apprehension and saying, okay, go ahead and be apprehensive, be afraid, be all of this crap, get it over with so I can get done what I have to get done. I know I'm going to do it. I just have to wait to drag my mechanical system into this obligation that I've defined as this is what you are going to do. It's deciding, it's, yes, this is what I am going to do. And now it's just finding the faculties to put the robot into motion. The final trigger that will trigger the response of actually moving and jumping into the water. But that's a lot different than saying it's not altruistic. Of course it is altruistic in the sense that it's just based on this idea that, yes, I'm going to go swimming. I've decided I'm going swimming. So I have to get into the pool. I don't want to get into the pool, but I know once I'm in the pool, I want to be in the pool. And now I just have to go through this process. So like pulling the nail out of your hand, you just sit there for a while playing with it, and then sooner or later you say, okay, just tie it to a string and pull it out, or do something. You figure out some way to get around your own psychological apprehensions to doing the right thing, but you're not really doing it in any other way than altruistic, in the sense that you're doing it in the sense that you have identified a truth that is the truth, and you're going to be obedient to it. And there's really no necessity to say whether or not you have a personal interest. You've just defined it as what has to be done.
Some way, right? Some action that you commit, and I think,
Well, I mean, yes. Although self-sacrifice, it becomes challenging. I was thinking of, I mean, yeah, probably.
like a soldier throwing himself in a grenade.
Yeah, this is the sort of example I was thinking.
But they still, I mean, you can still see, even if it's like totally irrational, somebody is doing that because either to maximize the intense pleasure of virtue that they feel in the moment of doing so, or the converse, which is the avoidance of the pain of the guilt of having not done so for the rest of their life.
Yeah, well, either one, though, it's going to be experienced in the moment. Now, in the moment, the guy isn't going to be having a good time. So the point is, when I'm pulling a nail out of my hand, I'm not going to have a good time. There's no good time involved. I'm not getting rewarded for doing the right thing. So you can't really say that it's a selfish act, because there is no selfish interest mechanism beyond acknowledging, okay, the fact that it's a bigger negative somehow not to do it. It doesn't have to be identified as a bigger negative. You don't have to see the face of the grieving wife that you didn't save her from being grieving because you didn't jump on the grenade and save her husband and blah, 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 blah. You don't have to go through all that elaborate thinking once you've already established this is the principle I'm going to live by. So in a sense, I'd say it's a pretty direct connection between the altruism and the act, and the fact that it is selfish in the sense, selfless in the sense that you've already pre-identified your own, you've already been humble and recognized you're not the only thing in the universe, you're not the only thing that's important, you're not the only thing valuable. Now, that's not a selfish thing to think. Right? There's no self-interest satisfied by recognizing your own inferiority or your own insignificance. So I'm just saying that in a sense you can say it is a selfless process of acknowledging or being humble. But in a sense that's a selfless process because you're not necessarily or not likely, in most cases, most self-examination, you're not going to come to the realization that I'm great, I'm super, I'm so much better than everybody else. It's going to be exactly the opposite conclusion. So there's obviously no self-interest in doing that process.
Like they're still kind of trying to aim at doing that. I mean, an interesting thought experiment that was put to me, and I've spoken to a few people and a few guests about this. It's an interesting.
So the argument would be not about whether you're altruistic or you're selfish. The argument would be is whether you're seeking the truth. And so you could say there's a self-interest in the truth. You recognize the truth is important, and there's people who don't think the truth is important, and those are the two kinds of people.
But if people listening want to, this was something that kind of proved to me that I think all actions are ultimately self-interested, which is if I put the dilemma to you of choosing between killing an innocent person and then immediately forgetting about it, or not killing the innocent person but living the rest of your life thinking that you've done it and living with.
Right. So these are dilemmas where you put somebody between a rock and a hard place and you try to figure out which one is harder. So so if I kill somebody, and then but I don't lose anything personally. So I don't pay any price for it personally. I don't necessarily gain anything either, but this, that's the thought experiment they have. Or I don't kill them, and I think I killed them, so I have guilt for somebody I didn't kill. Like they were actually killed by some other process, and it wasn't my act that did it somehow, like that happens. So the problem with this is there's not enough information to say which one is the right answer, because it depends on who I'm killing, right? If I'm killing a little girl, and if I'm killing her by giving her cancer, it's going to be a lot different answer than if I'm just killing Homer Simpson or something. So who I'm killing it matters. It's part of the equation, and there's such a diversity between people. I can put different people in that chair, and it's a completely different question then, depending on who I put in the chair, and who's in the electric chair, whether I'm going to pull the switch. So you can't even ask a question and say, oh, it's generic human. Well, what does generic human mean? And so if you say it's generic human in that it's Homer Simpson in a 10-year-old girl's dress, yeah, then I'll blow it. You know, fuck him, kill him. You know, it's win-win then, right? I forget I killed him and he's dead. Yeah, we both win. We all win. No, nothing could possibly lose then. So you made the question too easy. So anyway, so thought experiments just don't have much value when you're first off putting people in positions they never want to be in the first place, that is choosing between lesser of evils, and then you're just saying, you know, I'm not going to give you enough information for you to make the decision. I'm going to make it ambiguous enough where it's challenging because you don't know what the fuck you're really doing. You don't know what, even if you apply all of your best intelligence, you still can't figure out the right answer because there's not enough information to make that right answer. Unless you think there's something absolutely wrong with killing, when obviously there's not something absolutely wrong with killing. There's lots of people who the world would be a better place if they were dead. Just a fact. They're not going to do anything good. They're just going to make messes.
With that guilt, like, which would you choose? And people kind of virtuously might say, yeah, I wouldn't kill the person, I'd take the guilt. But I think rationally speaking, if you think about it hard enough, you realise that ultimately you would probably just kill the person. And it seems the rational thing to do in that situation.
So I would argue that's absolute nonsense. I don't. I think the question's way too vague for that statement. And I clearly, you know, if there was a real jeopardy, real harm I'm causing to somebody else, and in the other case, and everything else stays the same. So the only difference between the two worlds, the world where I don't kill them but think I did, and the world where I kill them, and the only difference between those two worlds is somebody has caused extra pain, that the world will actually have more suffering in it. I mean, that's the real question you want to ask. The world will have more suffering in it, or the world won't have more suffering in it. Then you can ask me the question. But there's no point in asking me the question when you're being ambiguous about what the net effect is of the decision I make. And then to say I made it selfishly. So make it real. Make it real in the sense that I kill somebody, or I endure 10 years of cancer. So give me something to lose personally that means something. I mean, 10 years of guilt doesn't mean shit. You know, 10 years of cancer means something. So you have to make the penalty higher to make the decision more obviously, where a personal incentive, you could possibly say, well, nothing's worse than 10 years of cancer. They're not going to have 10 years of cancer. So obviously it's better to kill them because the likelihood of them having 10 years of cancer is low, lower than 50-50. So then you can make the decision. But again, the life and death part becomes sort of irrelevant because all you're really talking about, will they make the world a better place or will they make the world a bit lesser place? And that's the decision you're going to make. If you're going to do it logically. If you're going to attempt to be logical, you're going to attempt to say, what's the median impact on the world of this person being alive versus being dead? And then you're just measuring it against what 10 years of cancer means. Will 10 years of cancer be prevented if that person lives? Will a harm equal to 10 years of cancer be prevented if that person lives? Well, if that's true, then yes, make the other decision. But the fact is, maybe I was going to have 10 years of cancer anyway. So it still doesn't make any sense.
I don't know, maybe that's not something you agree with, but I think, and it seems like a fairly, it's not a nice thing to admit. Like you say, it's quite revealing of yourself. But
so I'm saying it doesn't reveal much because it's too ambiguous. So again, just putting people between rocks and hard places and telling them, well, is the hard place as hard as the rock? I don't know. Is it? I don't know. It's just not a question that can be answered using logic and reasoning because you haven't provided enough information.
I think it's probably what most people would do.
It's easy to take the high ground and say, no, I would never do that. Yeah. I think there's a lot of questions where people, no, of course not, I would much rather live like this kind of self-sacrifice. I would much rather live that. But yeah, I mean, in practicality, we don't know. I mean, I think that's a lot of the time we just don't know what we do. Like the big button, I think.
Yeah, so you have to just make it clear. So if you just made it clear and just say there's a pill, you get immunity from a bad death and you have a perfect death. So that's what you're going to get. And these are the things that you're going to do to get it, okay? And one of them might be murdering or doing this or doing that. How much would you sacrifice for other people? How much jeopardy would you put them in to get your immunity to a bad death? You have to make it personal.
is...
And again, once you've made it personal, you're just forcing the person to do exactly what I just went through this whole process of explaining, which is then they have to go through their own personal ethics and say, I know what the right answer is, so I'll do the right thing, even though I don't like it. Because you're stuck with it. You don't really have a choice. Again, if they came up to me, again, you know, I've used this scenario, not that I'm Jesus, I'm Trump, you know, whatever. I'm not trying to say I am a brave person, because I'm not. I'm a despicable coward. But if somebody came to me with this promise that I could alleviate all this suffering, I could make a red button by hanging on a cross for a week, I'd say, go ahead, hang me on the cross. Because I know I have to do it. I know there's too much value in terminating the unnecessary harm for me to not say, yes, go ahead, torture me for a week, torture me for a month, torture me forever, which is really hard to say, you know. It's like, oh, you don't want to invite that kind of thing. But yes, if I can prevent that much suffering, you have to do it. Go ahead. If you can give me the broken leg and it prevents 10 broken legs that would have happened, that absolutely would have happened, but they're not going to happen because you gave me a broken leg. I have to say, break my fucking leg. I don't have a choice.
I mean, I wish I could tell you that I believe everything will be fine, so I would, of course, not push it. But if the button was there and I thought about it long enough, there's a good chance I'd press it, you know. So it's very difficult to know because how we want to be and how we want the world to be and how we want people to perceive us is often different to what we do in a situation where that option was presented to us.
And also there's an important distinction because oftentimes these things get caught up in talking about what you would do, but what we should really be interested in is what you should do, right?
Right.
So it's like, yeah, would you...
Exactly. So the whole conversation should just be about what the right answer is, not about testing people's integrity, you know, or their hypocrisy or their duplicity. Because yes, we're all duplicitous hypocrites sometimes. And all we can do is try to be protect against that, and especially in our rhetoric. And so all you have, though, yes, is the discussion about what the right answer should be, what it is. That's what we're really after, is the right answer. We're not after making people squirm.
Press the button, would you kill the innocent person? Well, maybe not, but what should you be doing? Yeah, that's the question for people.
So why shouldn't you press the big red button?
Well, that's the question.
But
yeah, what's the downside is you become completely as irrelevant as the absent Martians. And the Holocaust is just as bad as the absent Martians. And so it's pretty hard to measure it as any kind of downside. There's no wound left untreated. There's no horror remaining behind. There's no anything like that. So there's absolutely no negative consequence, except the removal of some notion that being a heroin addict is a good idea. That we need heroin addicts. I mean, if we got rid of heroin addiction tomorrow, I mean, would it be rational for anybody to grieve? And aren't we really just doing the same things? We're just air addicts and food addicts and sex addicts and all these kind of addicts. And so everything we fantasize about and everything we dream about are all dreams based on our addictions and our attachments, our needs. And so we can't imagine being without our needs, but if you think about it, you can imagine something else being without its needs. I can certainly imagine I can invent a Martian and I can eliminate him and I can see, oh yeah, it doesn't make any difference. I didn't lose anything important. Its needs are irrelevant and meaningless. They don't have any reality. They only have reality to the thing experiencing the need.
Philosophical reasoning would say that I mean, obviously there will be some. So what reasoning would there be to not, like a nihilistic perspective that it doesn't matter if you don't?
But the nihilistic position could only go as far as saying it's like indifferent.
Well, look, the nihilistic position shouldn't even be considered because there is no such thing because it's completely irrational. There's no way to be value nihilistic. There's no way to do it because every sentient organism understands the difference between feeling good and feeling bad. Nihilist will not say I enjoy feeling bad so much more than I enjoy feeling comfortable. I like pleasure. I mean, I like pain just as much as I like pleasure. It's just retarded. Nobody says it. Nobody does it. Nobody lives by it. It's nonsense. There's no such thing. All there are is assholes. So there's assholes who understand the difference between feeling good and feeling bad, and they just don't think it matters whether other people feel good or bad. How they feel matters. Them being comfortable, them being well-fed matters, but it just doesn't matter if other people feel good or bad. So they're just selfish cunts. There's selfish cunts. There's no such thing as nihilists. There's just selfish cunts.
what button's pressed or not. It can't say don't press the button.
Right.
It just says like I don't care, like do what you want.
Right.
There are like arguments for the sanctity of life, which I don't think are particularly compelling. But for instance, from a religious perspective, people think that you don't have the right to take the lives of other people. Natural rights views will take this approach of saying that
we're getting into a whole subject of right again. You're just really talking about what's the right answer. So any right that exists only exists as a right because there's some right answer that defends it. So you have to have right answers on your side before you can say you have a right. So to have a right, you have to have an argument defining the right that will be done by acknowledging your right. So as soon as you're capable of being an asshole or free to create liabilities or lose, then you can't say you have a right. I have a right to be an asshole. You don't have any such right.
Rights actually exist. Like you have an actual right to life. It's not like a product of, because I mean John Stuart Mill believed in rights, even though that seems weird as a utilitarian. He had a whole edifice of building up a system of rights that's just
yeah, but it's not based on, again, any understanding of the evolutionary context and the fact that rights are something built out of the necessity to recognize the difference between harm and pleasure, comfort and discomfort, and pain and pleasure, however you want to equate the two things, the positive and the negative, and that exists as systemic to all this living stuff. And that's the only place the right can be advocated from, is the fact that you're going to say something's right because something will be more beneficial than harmful. So if you're going to give a freedom, you have to recognize that freedom, you've accounted for the cost of it. You have a right to create a free lunch. You don't have a right to create an expensive lunch that's only paid for by Joe, or something like that. So, it's that simple. You have a right to do the right thing. You don't have a right to do the wrong thing.
justified in the utilitarian principle, which seems really counterintuitive, but it's done quite well, and it makes sense. But he doesn't believe that rights are actually their own thing. Bentham said that the concept of rights is complete nonsense, and natural rights is nonsense and stilts, quite famously.
Yeah, well, that's just idiotic. Again, the idea, the point is that the right is an emergent property of the function of doing the right thing, of having the right outcome. So it's all about outcomes, and that's all that really matters. So in the end, the only thing that can be right, or you have a right to do, is something that has the right outcome.
He didn't believe in them. But some people do. I don't give it the time of day, but that's one way you could perhaps get around it. Outside of that, I don't know what else there is. You have to believe in some kind of intrinsic value of life of its own accord, not because of the pleasure or because of the suffering that's involved with living, but
there's no point in even considering it outside of that network. And I would argue that you still can understand rights and still understand pain and suffering, and that there's rights to impose and rights not to impose. I mean, and reasons not to impose, and that's all there is reasons. Good reasons create rights. Bad reasons create no right.
Just life in itself. It's the same. It's a similar question of like an isolated case of somebody who's completely comatose and incapable of feeling pleasure and pain. Is there really any? It's not like should you flick the button. It's like, is that even a moral question? Like, does it matter? Is flicking that button not the same as like?
But that's a social contract question of who has the authority to impose on others. So then you get into imposition arguments. So that's where that one gets convoluted, because you could say that the person was a right to lifer and they thought every bit of their life they were entitled to, and therefore you have to respect their delusionary presumptions. So the same thing is really the inhibition, and so social contract only means that we make this deal that I won't impose my shitty judgment on you, and you don't impose your shitty judgment on me. And that's the nature of law and order, is some recognition that your rights end where my rights begin, blah blah blah. But again, the authority always in the bottom line is always going to be you're either right or you're wrong, and there's no right to be wrong.
Like turning off a computer or something, it's like, if there's no pleasure and pain there, is that really all that matters? Some people will intuitively feel that there's a value to the life. It's not just like flicking off a computer. There's something breathing there. There's something organic.
Right. Well, if the computer says don't turn me off, you have to consider, well, why is it saying that? Because I programmed it to say that, or is it some other reason? But anyway, the argument of consent gets into all of this, and so it gets a little more complicated in terms of another psychological question. But the bottom line is you don't have any obligation to respect illusions, except the obligation that if you want to live in a civilization where other people don't use their delusions to violate your ability to act out on your whatever, your accurate understanding, to violate your accurate understanding, then that's just a pragmatic thing. You have to do it. You have to make a compromise. You have to compromise with wrong to have your rights.
Maybe that's... But then again, that would just be what we do feel, not what we should feel. It's an indictment of our psychology that we have this strange value of life of its own accord, even though we have no rationale for it.
Well, maybe it's not even an indictment. Maybe it's something we should be thankful that we have.
Well, but it's only thankful by virtue of the fact that we think that we want some justification not to press the button, right?
Yeah.
It's like it's completely circular.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and why would you want to have anything that interrupts the process of doing something called pure reasoning or logic? So why would you want something to ever get in your way or bias you or prejudice you in terms of how you view the importance of a decision or anything else? Why would you want an exaggerated perception of the importance of a question merely because you have some human-centric bullshit that makes you apprehensive because it looks too human? Or why would you want those things fucking with your judgment?
We're only thankful to have a reason not to push the button because we don't want to push the button.
Yeah.
So
Right, because we don't want to wipe out this cosmetic mannequin view of human functionality that has nothing to do with the facts. So we know that the fact is there's a human being lying in a bed who's comatose. Well, if you're smart, the only thing that matters is how the brain is working. If the brain's not working, the brain's dead, okay, then anything that really matters about what that thing looks like is superficial. Because the only thing that makes any difference is this thing that's, the other thing that makes it anything other than a wooden mannequin is the brain. And if the brain's dead, the game's over. It's a wooden mannequin. Now you're just saying, I have to be careful. But then we're back to like even stuffed animals. It's difficult throwing one out because they talk to you, So don't throw me away. Everybody's been so cruel to me. I've had such a horrible life. I mean, they tell you their story, So I mean, that's just a part of our human a liability of our being sensitive, is that we're capable of extending our sensitivity to things that don't need it, but it's damn hard to ignore. It looks like, and therefore we have to feel it like.
I don't know if there's really an escape from it.
Is it? I don't know.
The escape is the very conversation. The very escape is to admit that no, it's a stuffed animal. Everything that it is that's important is only in your brain. It's only a figment of your imagination. It has nothing to do with the reality. So knowing that could make you capable of overcoming this emotional problem. Recognizing you have an emotional problem is the first step to overcoming your emotional problem, so to speak.
This is why philosophy is such an interesting thing to discuss, because it draws up so many challenging concepts.
Philosophy is interesting. Yeah, right. It's supposed to be a conversation about what the truth is. So yes, the truth should be interesting. I would hope it would be interesting. Finding the right answer would be interesting. Yes, should be, to every human being, interesting.
Concepts that are just, I think, sometimes beyond the realms of us, well, of course, beyond the realms of explain. That's the foundation, so anyway. So it is a very much interesting thing to conceive of. Is why shouldn't we do that? I mean, if we don't have some sort of, if you don't believe in religion, then there's no.
Yes, then you're stuck with recognizing it's just a meat grinder. We're just robots, and all there is all this wasted emotional crap. This sensation. All this wasted sensation being ground up in this mechanism that only has the only purpose is to do exactly that, just grind it up. Live, die, forget.
Preordained rights, where do these rights come from? Culture maybe, but I mean, culture is the poor determinating factor of something like that, of morality or rights.
Well, again, I say get lost on this word rights. It just doesn't. Yes, it's not a meaningful conversation because it's made out of all this other stuff that's underlying what the right is. And again, you don't really have a right to be a terrorist. You don't have a right to do all this negative stuff. So you don't have a right to be a menace. You don't have a right to violate consent. You don't have a right to exploit, blah, 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 blah. And they're all things you don't have a right to do because they're negative. So you do have a right to do the right thing, but you don't have a right to do the wrong things. It's pretty simple.
It can't be the basis.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
The meta-ethical basis.
Yeah. So if we don't have inalienable rights, then what do we have?
Exactly.
Well, again, we do have them in the sense that those are social contract rights, though. They have to be inalienable if you're going to have a society. So to have a society, you're not allowed to diminish my existence. I'm not allowed to diminish your existence. I'm not allowed to use you for food. You know, that kind of thing. I mean, it's just kind of obvious that the only way you can have a society is you have to have some prohibition against the fact that we can easily exploit each other.
And I think inalienable rights can only be thought of as inalienable. I think it's useful to think of them as inalienable. It's useful. It's like a metaphorical truth that Brett Weinstein would say, like the gun is always loaded even when it's not. It's useful to think that it is because practically it helps to stabilize things. In the same way, it's useful to think that rights are completely inviolable in any situation. You know, you can't twist the innocent person's thumb to save the other person's life. You can't do it. They have a right to it. But ultimately, that's not grounded in an intrinsic value of the right or existence of the right. It's grounded in a separate principle.
Yeah, it doesn't make any difference if you're really put in the hard place of having to make the decision of one of these thought experiments where it's a violation of rights either way. So, but you know, it's not about some social contract right. It's about what the right answer is.
Which I think is undermined by the fact that if it is the case that life consists mainly in suffering, I think the whole thing is undermined, especially if the rights, including the right to life, is built on...
Yes, if all the goods are substantially made out of the elimination or removal or prevention of bads, then yes, you got no game to play. The game is intrinsically running a deficit.
Top of this kind of utilitarian principle, then by knocking out the utilitarian principle, we're also knocking out the rights. So it just all falls down, completely falls down.
So where does that leave us?
Somewhere not very pleasant.
No,
somewhere nihilistic and somewhere of...
But is that...
So, because again, this whole idea of it, but whether it's pleasant, it is to me pleasant to acknowledge that this suffering doesn't have to continue, that we can use our intelligence to break a broken game. We can stop this gladiator war that just keeps going on every Sunday, blah, 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 blah. And say, fuck it, it's stupid, it's a waste of suffering. And so that's rather pleasant.
And I feel that just makes sense. And I feel that people try and deny that it's almost like a religion. I think this is how I feel about religion. That people are religious because it gives them a sense of inner peace. And I think that often with philosophical teachers, I think that the default is nihilism, and then we try to convince ourselves of
right. The default isn't nihilism. It can never be nihilism because as a sentient being, you can't be nihilistic. A computer could be nihilistic because a computer could say, fuck you, I don't see any of this pain and suffering thing anywhere. Where's that? Where'd you make up that story? You know, so if something's never felt pain, then clearly something can have a diminished perception of its meaning. But something that has experienced it is experienced it. You can't be a nihilist once you've experienced it. So there's no true nihilist. It's just lies. They're just selfish cons.
Of different principles, so that we can try and give ourselves a sense of inner peace, you know, with rights or whatever. And so, but is that when everything trickles down, we discuss, is that not just where everyone's going to fit in that sense?
Yeah, I mean, even like the thing that I've spoken about before with people like Stephen.
Right. So you're stuck with truths. If you're going to go with this stupid God theory, then you have to accept that somehow the nature of existence is placating some God who needs to be entertained by watching us jump through stupid hoops. And you know, in some sort of competition to be, you know, morally correct or whatever the stupid functionality would be. Do the right thing by this stupid little game we have to play. Jump over these super stupid little hoops. Pretend you love. Pretend you care. Pretend. When of course you don't do any of those things. You see the other woman walking down the street and you say, yeah, that's worth. And you know. So just pretend the reality doesn't exist and be obedient to some idiotic, go through the motions of being a human by God's definition, whatever the fuck that is. And then evolution, you're stuck with you know, it's a meat grinder. It kills. It is the worst psycho killer imaginable. I mean, nature just goes out and brutally tortures and murders children in insane numbers. insane ratios. How can you defend that?
Rules is the idea that people use religion to get that kind of basis, but ultimately that itself is still a fairly flawed basis, because you ask about why you would care about what the divine creator of the universe thinks, and you still end up in a similar kind of nihilistic spiral. But if listeners don't feel that way, if you don't feel that life consists mainly in suffering, which I think many people would dispute that.
So again, using the word suffering is, in my opinion, just makes the word suffering not mean anything anymore, because you're not defining what you're talking about. There's a difference between pain and, you know, trauma because you know, there's a dent in your car. I mean, you know, this idea that suffering, the levels of suffering are very different, the moments of it, the intensities of it, and that all matters. That's part of the context. Just saying life is suffering is too simplistic.
But also, if you're just somebody who doesn't like to go down that rabbit hole and is thinking at the level of practical ethics, as well as philosophy taking you to these horrific, annoying...
I mean, it's good to throw in all the words, maybe. You know, life is suffering, life is addiction, life is glorification, life is a lot of things. You got to add up all the words. Life is futile. You know, life is reoccurring.
In difficult places. Philosophy can also take you to places like the realization that perhaps you should stop eating animal products. That's what it did for me. It can kind of take you both ways. I hope that people listening have kind of been given some food for thought in that sense, in both directions, of course, but use this philosophical principle.
No, this philosophical conversation about the context of our existence totally defeats the motivation, in my opinion, for this nonsense that there's some intrinsic fundamental difference between the animals captured in our factory farms and the animals in nature getting brutalized this moment. And so it just makes it clear that there's, number one, that the amount of problem there is to be solved is humongous, and that this minor solution of this personal initiative is so tiny and minuscule, and in some ways superficial, in the sense that, you know, realistically, in some respects, our civilization has paved over land that would have been populated by organisms, and so in some ways the slaughterhouse itself has prevented animals from tormenting each other and suffering, because you can't fit as many animals on the surfaces. By having the cows eat all the grass, then all the other animals don't exist. You know, these kind of rational arguments can be made, and that this is really just an overt statement. I mean, it's a minor statement in a war that needs much louder statements than "don't eat meat." It needs a lot more than that. We have to do a lot more than that.
Consistency.
A lot more than that.
Examine why it is that you feel certain things are right or wrong, and whatever justification you have for that, whether you're a natural rights theorist or a utilitarian or you're a religious person or whatever it may be, figure out what it is in that ethical construct that's making you think that something else is wrong, like racism or sexism. Think why it is, what's the rationale for saying that's wrong, and just see if it applies to animals too. And I think that most of the time it just absolutely does. Well,
I don't know if I can make anything out of that. I don't think the politics of our interactions between each other doesn't have much to do with the philosophical insight of recognizing what the big game is we're playing, which is stupid.
I think also, just something to add towards the end there, is like, these issues of should we or shouldn't we say press the button, or, you know, that's not something we actually control over. So they're really interesting things to debate, but regardless of whether or not we think we should press that button, or you know, or if the
yeah, but pressing the button can be in increments, and it has to do with different steps you take, and you know, so this whole argument that it'll never happen is bullshit. We know that small groups of people can create all kinds of mayhem. So you know, who knows what well-motivated group could do, and blah 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 and all this stuff. So why even speculate about that? Just know that it doesn't get done by not talking about it, and it certainly doesn't get done by everybody just saying it's okay for people to disagree, or saying it's okay to just you know, it's a political position. Fuck that shit. There's right and wrong. You got to fight for the right. Period.
minimization of suffering taken to its extreme is this scenario. Yeah. That's not something that's ever going to happen, something you have control over. And so we have to kind of operate within what's possible to us in the world that we live in. Sure. And so if we do believe in...
Well, frankly, the only way you win is by paving that road. So I'm just saying, eventually, the red button won't be about blowing up 7 billion people, but it will be about finishing off whatever's left. So you'll minimize, you'll prevent, do as much preventing as possible, and the preventors will still exist, and so eventually they're going to have to be prevented or cease to exist, cleaned up, and so there still will be a red button of sorts. It's just going to be in a different form, but you sort of have to press it in steps.
The minimization of suffering, and yes, that might be the fundamental logical conclusion, but it'll never happen. So let's just operate in the framework of what we have in our availability, and the minimization of suffering, according to what we can do, is including, you know, the minimization of animal suffering.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying the end game is still making the button, so to speak, in the sense that you're making the same end product as the button, which is the extermination of the problem. And the fact is, we don't have some way to do it now where we can just press the button and it happens, but we do have this process where we press buttons that will lead to that happening.
Vegan.
Yeah. Now I'm worried that if we go this on any longer, then we'll start inflicting some suffering on our listeners, because they'll just be kind of dragging themselves along. Ears are probably hurting from the headphones that they're wearing. But I think in sort of closing, I've become convinced recently, it's become the most ethically obvious thing to me that I need to be a vegan and that other people need to be vegan too. Do you think it is irresponsible to say that veganism is the most important moral emergency currently facing us?
Oh yeah, I think that's just preposterous. You know, yeah. It's such a superficial percentage of the suffering on Earth. It's just silly.
No, I don't think it's irresponsible. I think actually, if you view everything in its totality, that's the obvious statement, because it transcends beyond just what's happening to animals. It looks at what's happening to our planet, and also looks at what's happening to our health as well.
Again, our planet. So again, he's talking about the planet as if it has a health crisis of some kind, and the planet doesn't care whether it's covered with microbes or it's covered with Tyrannosauruses or it's covered with crocodiles. It doesn't give a shit. So that's just nonsense.
And so if we view the number of preventable deaths in humans alone, the human rights injustices that occur in slaughterhouses and in other environments of animal exploitation, it becomes this all-encompassing ideology that deals with so many different issues. And so a lot of other social justice issues, if that's the right terminology, it's not single. It is quite a single issue.
No, because most of the social justice issues have to do with a bunch of dysfunctional, a bunch of stuff that is broken, validating being broken. So it's just more excuse-making for brokenness, instead of acknowledging the fact that it all costs money and it's wasteful, and to have your whatever handy capable ramps, that means that some kid somewhere doesn't get fed. It's just a fact. You have to waste resources on this kind of crap, and are you doing anything to make that valuable, that expenditure? Wouldn't it be just better just to replace you with something that actually worked and wasn't broken? Let's just concede that all of us who have brokenness have to concede that the brokenness gets to a point where it makes you dysfunctional. It makes you unproductive. It means you're a consumer, not a producer. You know, it's just a fact. And those facts get all blown up in this stupid nonsense that, you know, everybody's marvelous or something. Some sort of generic lovey-dovey bullshit.
Deals with one problem, but this deals with a multitude of different problems. And so actually, if the question becomes, you know, what is the most important thing that we can do in our day-to-day lives to alleviate the most suffering, being vegan is absolutely that thing.
Sure. I think because...
Now, what's the easiest nothing effort you can make? You know, well, whatever. I don't want to diminish it, but I mean, it just isn't a real solution to the real problem, which is the basic. This is a game where things are being made to be destroyed. The evolution works that way. That's the way it functions, is to make way too many copies and kill them brutally. And you do that through making them vulnerable to disease and damage and deprivations. So, you know, it's wrong answer. So they end with a whimper. So anyway, we'll call it enough of a video. I've been talking for 5 hours actually, and you know, 4, whatever, a long time. I'm tired of it. Yeah, I'm tired of it. So sorry you didn't get the full 4-hour video, but you have to live with what you get. Sorry. Rough morning. Tired. Hopefully now, third time is the charm. It's going to save this video. Please.